My name is Bjorn Ovar Johansson. I'm a Manchester-based interim CIO, and I help companies with significant IT issues in the UK and across the EMEA. I've worked in multiple sectors, including life science, healthcare, financial services and professional services. Apart from working as an interim CIO, I also specialize in operational risk mitigation. It's a topic where I do advisory work on board and C-level, as well as write articles, for instance, in CIO Magazine UK and CFO World, and I give lectures on this topic. So what is it that we as CXOs and board directors should know about operational risks, and especially about operational risks in IT? And why is it that, at least in my world, the knowledge and understanding of the impact of operational risk is often underestimated or even ignored? Looking at recent headline news, and I'll just mention a few examples. In the US this summer, a major American airline had its entire fleet grounded for several hours due to network problems. Problems that could have been resolved before they happened. A well-known global dating site leaked 37 million email addresses, and it's pretty uncertain what will happen with that organization going forward. We've seen bank after bank having operational risk problems with everything from failed ATM machines to a leading UK bank that were delaying payments to 600,000 customers. We've seen 3 large European banks postpone large transformation programs with significant write-offs as a consequence. This list can be very, very long, and the headlines we read are typically just the top of the iceberg, according to my opinion. So what is operational risk and how do we define it? I normally use the Basel II definition, which reads: operational risks are the risk of monetary losses due to faults or errors in technology, process, or due to the human factor. It can also be contributed to other external factors such as environmental disasters, fraud, and so forth. So, what is the main issue? Why is it that so many executive management teams and board of directors sometimes ignore or underestimate operational risk? And are we, as CIOs, part of the problem, or are we part of the solution? The way I see it, many senior executives look at IT as something complex, something abstract, and something which is difficult to really have a firm opinion on. They leave a lot of the decisions to the CIO, which of course is the right thing to do. However, as CIOs, we may be part of the problem for the simple reason that when we are not on the management team, for instance reporting to the CFO, naturally the agenda on the executive management team will more be around IT costs than anything else. So in that sense we are part of the problem. We need to find a way to address these issues with senior management, even if we are not on the board or executive management level. Obviously, we are also part of the solution at addressing operational risk in an effective and structured way, and I will give you some ideas how you can do this in an even better way. So, when investigate and analyze operational risks in an organization? Well, I've already mentioned that my personal view is, as CIO, we should own this area and this area of responsibility. However, there are at least 4 examples where I view an operational risk analysis is absolutely mandatory. First, prior to any strategic decision on executive management or board level, for instance, prior to a major outsourcing or a business transformation program. Secondly, operational risks in IT should be analyzed prior to any, or as part of any M&A due diligence. Thirdly, as newly appointed and externally recruited CXO, CEO, CFO, CIO, etc., or chairman of the board, I would highly recommend looking into operational risks. And finally, in any organization where the board are not absolutely sure that the organization are on top of operational risks. These are 4 examples where I personally recommend an analysis of operational risks. So, how do we do this? Is there a practical approach to managing, mitigating operational risks? Well, there are, to start with, a number of rather complex frameworks that are used, for instance, within the financial services sectors and several other sectors where risk mitigation is more or less mandatory. However, I've chosen to recommend a more pragmatic, practical approach that might fit SMEs, some public organizations, and that is much easier to implement. The practical approach includes 5 separated steps. The first one is to identify what are the relevant risk areas that we want to investigate. Now, this can be either from a geographical dimension, a functional dimension, from a business organizational dimension, for instance, starting with one subsidiary or one division. But I think it's important to identify what and identify and define what risk areas should be analyzed. Having done that, it's pretty straightforward. We analyze and assess the current risks that we can identify within these areas. Having done that, we can evaluate risk levels, looking at dimensions such as likeliness that the risk will materialize and the impact, the consequences of a materialized risk. If possible, I would highly recommend also to look at financial consequences, especially when it comes to what it would cost if a certain operational risk were materialized. Based on this, we should have a pretty good idea of what sort of decisions and actions we would like to take. What I normally do is I come up with a recommendation based on the evaluation of risk levels and proposed activities or projects that will help us over time mitigate those risks. Finally, having started the operational risk mitigation work as such, I also recommend organizations to implement a governance model. It doesn't have to be a very complex governance model, but with clear ownership and clear structures and clear reporting. For instance, allowing the management team to follow up on the operational risk portfolio and the status as a cycle. And at the end of each cycle, then make new decisions on additional risks that the company or organization wish to mitigate. So how do we analyze? And now I'm talking primarily about the first couple of bullets that I just made. I think it's important to be successful in an operational risk mitigation to see this as a team effort, as a company-wide effort. This is not an IT issue in that perspective, even though CIO holds a very important role. I'd like to see business and IT working together as a team. And in this illustration, you see examples of areas and questions that we want to look into. Again, this is an example, and let me elaborate a little bit around two of these areas. If we look at IT as such, are our systems and hardware redundant? Do we have a redundant network? Do we have proper disaster recovery and planning? Do we practice disaster recovery and fallback procedures? What are the roles and processes in place if something goes wrong? What's the history of IT failures and what did we do about them? And do we have IT performance management? Basic KPIs following SLAs and IT performance in general. Now, if the questions are a very clear yes on all these areas, then you should probably be relatively okay. But let me share with you, I've come in as interim CIO in listed companies and been forced basically to speak with the CEO and the chairman of the board, informing them that they are sitting with a non-redundant ERP system for a relatively global organization. For the simple reason they were not aware, and for the simple reason that IT didn't push this very important question hard enough. The second example is actually finance. And you may ask yourself, what has finance got to do with operational risks and operational risks in IT? Well, finance manage a number of core processes in an organization. Order to cash, procure to pay, record to report, and so on. I've seen examples of an organization that were not in control of the kickbacks they paid to their customers. The kickback amounts were based on sales forecasts and not actual sales. And the consequence of this was that that organization paid out in excess of £50,000 per year, which was a rather large amount for that organization. I've also seen organizations that are not in control of and don't have in place automated reconciliation of ledgers like accounts payable and accounts receivable. So this gives you an idea of some of the questions you may want to ask within finance. Finally, I think it's imperative and a responsibility as CIO to make sure that IT has a proper backup in place during significant and important periods within the finance calendar, such as end of month, end of quarter, end of year, and also during salary payments. Finally, coming back to the last bullet in the practical approach how to manage operational risks, I'd like to talk just a little bit around the follow-up. Now, you can do this in many different ways. One model that I find works rather well is to produce some sort of scorecard illustrating the operational risk situation in the organization. And as I've already mentioned, rating risks based on financial impact, the likeliness and the severity if a specific a specific operational risk would occur. This is an example of such a scorecard where you see a number of plotted risks according along the two axes, and I've singled out here 9 risks that are the most important ones. Now, based on this type of a matrix, it's also possible to calculate a KPI or an index, a risk index, allowing you to monitor risk over time and monitor how well the organization can reduce the operational risk in the organization. I would also suggest using this type of a follow-up scorecard, that it's not necessarily the case that IT and the CIO owns all of the identified operational risks that are to be mitigated. It could very well be that the CEO and the executive management team decide to delegate certain risks to other members of the executive management team or other parts of the organization. I think what's important is that you have some sort of tool to help you know where you are for the time being and compare with previous benchmarks. Finally, in summary, what are the benefits of actively working with analyzing and mitigating operational risks? First of all, it gives the board of directors and executive management team control that they obviously lacked. Secondly, and equally important I think, it will help you as CIO shift the focus from IT costs to other areas that are equally important, and it will help you drive quality, efficiency, and hopefully contribute to an overall cost reduction for the organization. And finally, and I think in retrospect, a lot of organizations would have wished they had taken an active approach to op risks prior to getting them headline news for all the wrong reasons. Thank you very much.